After the initial talk with Quella, Shiro was told to wait for her sister's responses after they figured out what they should do with her newfound power. With so much mystery behind it, they needed to test out its capabilities before trying it against the ancient terror, with Shiro needing to earn money for the weapon and armors as well. The monsters on the bounty board were perfect test subjects, since one divinity rank monsters were already easily killable for Shiro. Their best subjects were those with 2 divinities. One of the ones that Quella suggested Shiro to try was the Gorgon, since she had a bow and arrow, remembering her experience with the Gorgon back on Earth. Shiro rejected it since she didn't want to be turned to stone. She had thought that she could just ignore their gaze and she'll be fine, but no. They would petrify her even without making eye contact. In the end, they decided to fight against one of the native creatures underground. Its name was Hamina. I was a strange creature who could solidify its outer layer into a shell whenever it wanted. While in this state, the shell is like high-grade armor which was highly resistant to damage. However, the trouble comes from when it decides to go for the soft form. In this soft form, they're able to secrete a paralyzing liquid which acts quickly if one so much as touches it. When the prey is paralyzed, the Hamina would wrap its soft body around the victim before hardening its body into countless spikes and pierce the victim, killing them in a similar way to how Iron Maidens would. Currently, the Hamina is migrating towards a new valley and the villages on the way there are being ravaged, hence why a bounty was set out for it. But due to the tough shell and high risk factor, many have left it be for now since it was going to stop once it reached the valley. Only someone with 3 divinities would be confident enough to do the task without any worry, but they were too busy with bigger problems. When Shiro registered for the bounty, the attendant at the counter looked at her with skepticism before eventually nodding her head, thinking that Shiro probably didn't know much and was only there for the reward. After all, the gold reward was an astounding 70 gold. Excuse me, young miss. I know you killed the Minotaur, but the Hamina is more dangerous than the Minotaur. One touch, and you'll be rendered defenseless. The woman cautioned while handing Shiro the rest of her reward in regards to the mysterious monster that she had already completed. With 50 gold in her bag, she only needed 250 more gold. Yes, I know. Don't worry, I'll make the necessary preparation to fight it. Shiro nodded her head and summoned her bow. Plus, if they couldn't kill it, it wasn't like the Hamina could spit out a stream of paralyzing liquid. At most, it would try its best to jump up and wrap around Shiro, but if she could dodge that, she can just shoot at the monster. While flying in the air, *I'll give you the latest information we have on the Hamina. Then, the woman sighed, before stepping away from the counter. Coming back with a piece of parchment, she showed Shiro a map of sorts. The last known location of the Hamina is in the village of Iron, which is towards the east. Taking into account its traveling speed, we assume that it'll arrive at the next village within the next 5 days. This is its estimated travel path since we figured out that its main goal is probably to reach the Hellmouth Valley, which is not too far from the border. Be careful though, Hellmouth Valley is home to monsters that our strongest warriors struggle with. If you really want to cut off its escape path, I suggest starting near the village of Weir. The geography around that area should help you fight the monsters since there are large boulders and small hills to act as your cover if you use the bow. The woman explained as she might as well help Shiro increase her chances of survival. Nodding her head, Shiro memorized all of the information in her database. However, there was one thing that concerned her ever so slightly. The fact that the Hellmouth Valley was near the border, with the next section being the section of the underworld. Criminals could pop up at any location. Some will definitely be as strong as Kiona that she had met the other day, and as a woman of her looks, she needed to be careful since she's not able to protect herself yet with just one divinity. Common bandits are fine, but when people get power, their ugly nature is further exposed. Once Shiro had memorized the map, she made her way out of the mercenary hall. On her way out, a golden butterfly landed next to her shoulder. After you kill the Hamina, you should look around and see if you could resonate with some blessed weapons like your bow. Since you're near the section of the underworld, Hade's blessed items could be nearby. Hearing Quella's voice from the butterfly, Shiro was somewhat surprised. Don't be so shocked. This is essentially my familiar. It won't be with you all the time though since it'll run out of power, but I'll send familiars to you when I can. Quella chucked as Shiro nodded her head. Once she was out of the city, She immediately unfurled her wings and launched herself into the sky. Thankfully, she was traveling inland despite heading to the east, so the amount of air tunnels was increasing, giving her quick boosts of speed to catch up with the Hamina. A trip that should have taken a lot longer than a week was cut short thanks to this. However, there was barely any sign of the Hamina. Occasionally, she could see destruction caused by the beast, but that was it. Trying her best to chase down the monster, she finally saw it after another 5 days. Now, they were quite close to the village of Weir that was near the border. As for the monster, well, it was a lot different to what she had imagined, and the size did not match at all. Previously, its body was an iridescent blue which hardened to brown whenever it switched forms. Its general form resembled that of a snail, only with multiple extrusions which looked like eyes. However, now its body was a purple-tainted flesh color that had bones bubbling in and out of its body. Instead of protrusions for eyes, it now had sunken sockets, much like the ancient terror, as eyeballs could be seen. Swimming around the surface of its body, there was a single split in its mouth which had a black goo dripping out which was similar to the liquid from the pool of corruption that she had seen before. Seems like it must have come into contact with a pool of corruption much like the one you told me about. The one located near where you had found the bow. Quella sighed. Do you know of someone that could be planting these pools on purpose? The seed couldn't have just shown up out of nowhere. Shiro frowned. There's probably someone who has found some text about him. A corruption sapling is different from a dread sapling in that it needs some specific conditions to be cultivated. However, that's a thought for later. Right now we need to deal with this thing. If that thing gets into the Hellmouth Valley and spreads the pool of corruption, then stronger monsters will appear after it. Kill it here, and I'll get my sisters to clean up the aftermath. I know. Nodding her head, Shiro summoned her bow and conjured up an arrow. Without her even controlling error 403, Shiro felt a small sting on her right hand and red circuits corrupting the arrow, furrowing her brows. Shiro glared at the source which originates from her right hand and realized that the element was more aggressive and uncontrollable in the Forgotten Realm, as if the prison locks surrounding it had suddenly widened. It could now stick its hands out whenever it wanted and even attack the warden if they get close to it. Was rather dangerous since Shiro had lost her control over it. However, it also seemed a little docile. Narrowing her eyes, she fired the arrow. Watching the arrow travel through the air, Shiro watched as the Hamina glanced towards her before it could even cry out. The arrow suddenly exploded as hundreds of circuits stabbed themselves into the Hamina's body. Yura. Thrashing around in pain, its body started to twist and reshape itself in an attempt to push the circuits off from its body. However, the circuits were like thousands of tiny serpents that constantly chewed away at the soft flesh. Understanding that its current form couldn't fight against this strange being, the Hamina paused for a second before solidifying its body, pushed back by the sudden appearance of a tough shell. The circuits stepped back for a moment before attacking with more enthusiasm, raising her eyebrow at this. Shiro drew back her bow and summoned another arrow. This time, the circuits didn't corrupt the arrow as it was just a normal arrow that she could summon. Could it be that the error 403 can only release a certain amount of itself? Shiro wondered to herself, furrowing her brows. She tried to command the error to come back, but it seemed to be adamant on eating through the hard shell of this giant slug before it. Clicking her tongue, she figured that it was better to treat the error as a being of its own, something akin to a disobedient een. Let it do what it wants for now. I'll support it in killing this beast. Shiro muttered. Summoning a few arrows, she notched them all at once and fired them towards the Hamina. Clink, clink, clink. Bouncing off of its tough shell, Shiro could see some white marks left behind by the arrow. In addition to this, the Hamina's body seemed to have sunken down a little into the ground, which shows how powerful the arrows were now that she had obtained her first divinity. There was just one problem, and that was the fact that the Hamina has gone full defense mode and refused to expose even a small portion of its body. Seeing this, the circuits were enraged. Forming a spear or sorts, it jammed it into the armor of the Hamina and started to chip it little by little naturally. Shiro understood what the circuits wanted to do and fired arrows as support. Soon, A small groove was formed as the circuits lunged forth with eagerness. Asterisk crack. Pushi. Stabbing the virus spear deep into its flesh. It used the edge of the armor as a leverage and started to rip the armor apart from the flesh. A sick tearing sound could be heard as the purple flesh tried its best to stick onto the shell, but it was torn apart, and black goo started to flow out like blood, shifting its shape into a drill. The circuits started to rampage around the Hamina's body while Shiro stood there awkwardly, with how eager the error was being. She didn't even have to lift a single finger. After a short while, all of the armor had been peeled back, and the Hamina was now twitching constantly from the wounds it had suffered. As for the circuits, it had returned to her side and bounced around the back of her hand as if asking for praise, sighing softly. Shiro used her spare hand to pat it gently. Good job, she praised with a soft smile, seemingly satisfied with this. The circuits twisted around for a little before disappearing. Error 403 energy, 0/100. Raising her eyebrows, Shiro realized that this was the limit. The error had used everything to pry apart the Hamina's armor, if she had to be honest. It would have been extremely hard for her to accomplish what the error had done since she had to take advantage of the openings that it showed. The fight would be much longer and tenacious if not for the error landing on the ground. Shiro was about to walk up to the Hamina when she felt danger all around her, not even taking a moment to say anything. She ducked down and used her bow as a protective tool. Hearing the sound of wet flesh colliding against her bow, Shiro shifted her body and used the momentum to throw the flesh away. Who knows what it might do if she let it stay? Hopping back, she made some distance as a wave of dizziness hit her, but it only lasted for a second. TSK. It's paralyzing liquid, Shiro muttered with a frown. While the error did indeed peel away all of the armor, it didn't mean the Hamina was dead. It was just in a weakened state. Looking up, Shiro watched as the barely moving slug monster could only resort to throwing out bits of its body as a last resort. Just from this, Shiro could already tell the severity of its current state. While it's not as dangerous in terms of ripping out the source codes, this is still rather violent, she thought to herself, pulling back on her bow. She sent a few arrows towards the Hamina. Asterisk pushi pushi pushi. Despite having the arrows sink into its body, the force was still enough to send it rolling back by quite a few meters, filling the Hamina with arrows. Shiro's sense for danger only increased, which caused some concern in her. However, this concern was soon answered. Asterisk rumble. An earthquake suddenly hit the area as the spots where the black goo had touched were now split apart. Asterisk bang. Shooting out of the ground, hundreds of spider legs clawed against the fractured earth before dragging a dark shadow out of the depths. Its entire body was covered by the black goo while a few of its eyes were exposed to the sunlight. Did I say it did a good job? I think it might have made it a little harder for me. Shiro's smile twitched as the butterflies on her shoulder only flickered for a moment. The longer we take to kill him, the more corrupted monsters will appear thanks to the black goo. We should kill it quickly, Quella suggested as Shiro agreed, notching some arrows. She dashed towards the spider. Jumping up, she shot some arrows into the joints before forcing it to kneel down, firing an arrow at the bottom so that she could force its leg away. She had the spider pierce the Hamina through the body as the purple flesh writhed around in pain. Unfurling her wings, she soared up into the sky, avoiding several of the spider's legs which tried to grab her instantly, narrowly dodging by the side. She pulled back on her bow and gathered as much power as she could. Asterisk bang. Firing a powerful singular shot, she managed to shatter the spider's leg and pin the Hamina against the ground. Shivering for a little longer, it stopped as its entire body relaxed. The purple flesh spewed out as if the thing holding it together had completely snapped apart. 1. Shiro muttered before glaring at the spider. Since the black goo could mutate more monsters like this, she had to take care of it quickly, releasing a heavy amount of killing intent. Shiro watched as the spider's body tense up for a moment, landing near the corpse of the Hamina. She grabbed the broken spider leg, which thankfully wasn't covered with black goo, and notched it on her bow. Pulling back, she fired the leg towards its main body as the sluggishness caused it to fail at dodging the leg, not even giving it a chance to scream. Shiro pierced all of the exposed eyes with her arrow, flying towards one of them. She stomped down as hard as she could and sent the arrow deep into their body, flipping her body back. She avoided the splash of black goo and continued to send arrows deep into its body. Thanks to her killing intent, she was able to restrain the spider's movements, making it harder for it to dodge her arrows. Sometimes I wonder where you studied your fighting style, since this rather different when compared to our fighting style. Quella chuckled. Who knows? Shiro shrugged while grabbing some proof from the hyena's corpse. Once she was done, she glanced around the spot and located where she was on the mental map. Let's check out the border, I suppose. Shiro muttered, since she wanted to try her luck at getting another blessed weapon. Putting the proof away in her bag, she unfurled her wings and started to fly through the air. Taking a deep breath, she was happy that she took Nike as her first divinity, since this power of flight was very convenient and it helped her save time with travel. Had it not been for this, it might have been hard to catch up to the hyena, much less stop it from entering the section of the underworld, seeing the dark clouds in the distance. Shiro felt a small shiver down her spine. Yikes. No wonder it's called the section of the underworld. Just being near the border makes me feel uncomfortable. Shiro sighed while glancing towards the ground. To her surprise, she saw a pair of mother and daughter being chased by some shrouded people. Furrowing her brows, Shiro immediately dived down at breakneck speed, seeing the fear and panic in their eyes. Shiro figured that she might as well listen to the story later. Just before one of the swords could hit the mother and daughter, Shiro pulled back on her bow and fired an arrow. Asterisk ping. Knocking the sword aside, her sudden appearance grabbed their attention. TSK, annoying person. Leave. This is not your business. One of the shrouded people shouted out as their voice was quite feminine. I know it's not my business, but I'm just a nosy one. I can't help but intervene if I see people getting harmed. Though, of course, if you want to tell me a good reason, then I'll leave. Shiro smiled. You want to know what she did? Fine, I'll tell you. These two are wanted poison users that tried to kill a whole city of people. The little girl is the master and the older one is the student. We've finally cornered them after they ran out of poisons, so please stay out of this. The shrouded woman glared at the two hatefully as Shiro raised her eyebrow, glancing back. Shiro narrowed her eyes at the duo, looking back at the shrouded woman. She could see that the hate was real and that there were even tears forming on the edges of her eyes. There's a good chance that they're telling the truth. Shiro thought to herself. Sure, go for it. Shiro smiled and hopped back slightly, seeing her reaction. Both parties didn't expect that she'd actually step back, since the people appearing in these kinds of situations would help the duo that looked like mother and child without any questions. What? Unless you're lying and you want me to fight the lot of you. Shiro raised her eyebrows, and the shrouded woman shook her head hastily. Many thanks. She nodded before lunging towards the two for the next few moments. Shiro watched as they hacked the two into small pieces, starting at the limbs, since they took the effort to kill them as painfully as possible. Shiro could really tell that they hated the two. Phew, thank you for staying out of it. The shrouded woman thanked her after taking a moment to calm herself. You're welcome. Appearances can be deceiving. If I didn't take the time asking you about what happened, you would have just looked like some crooked bandits. Shiro smirked. This outfit is to help against her poisons. We had no choice. The shrouded woman laughed as Shiro nodded her head. That's just unfortunate then. Do you happen to know if there are any blessed weapons around here? She asked with a shrug. Hearing her question, they looked at her with confusion. First of all, no one would tell others where a blessed weapon could be, since they're the most powerful weapons that one could get their hands on. Not only were they basically indestructible, they also had benefits outside of divinities. So many would die to get their hands on a weapon like that if they knew where one was. They'll try to keep it a secret as much as they can. Second of all, let's say they were going to tell someone. The last person on the list would be Shiro, since she was a stranger. No idea? Oh well, see you. Shiro shrugged and gave them a small wave, unfurling her wings. She soared into the sky, looking at their shadow. They looked at one another before leaving. After a short pause, Shiro returned to the spot with a grin. Phew, I thought they might have known, but seeing their confusion, I think I'm safe to try getting this weapon. Shiro muttered with a grin as she glanced down on her left arm, shimmering slightly was Quella's familiar, who had whispered to her about the existence of a blessed weapon nearby, while they were killing the two poison users, since the group of shrouded people didn't know the existence of this weapon. She didn't need to worry too much. So where is it? Shiro asked while glancing towards the butterfly. Follow me. Flying behind the butterfly, Shiro tried her best to make sure that she was as camouflaged as possible. However, it was a little hard when her white wings were essentially glowing in this environment. Once she was near, she deactivated her divinity and walked the rest of the way. Upon arrival, Shiro's smile twitched slightly. Wasn't this the Hellmouth Valley that you told me not to come to before? Shiro asked. The mountains surrounding the valley seemed to pierce into the sky as dark gray clouds shrouded the peak from being seen. Occasionally, she could see large faint shadows through the clouds as they were most definitely large-scale monsters that could erase her with a single sneeze. However, there was more to this valley. In front of her was a deep ravine with jagged rocks along the walls. She could even see a few moving shells shifting through the crevices as this was where Quella said the weapon was. It is, but the weapon is down there. Most of the monsters have been scared off by its aura, so this is probably one of the best chances for you to go down. Plus, the weapon isn't the only benefit. Hundreds of adventurers have died in the ravine, so you might find something helpful when you go down. You just need to be careful and make sure you run the moment I say it regardless of what you're doing, okay? I've stationed quite a few butterflies around this place to act as sentries, so I should be able to tell whenever a monster is approaching you. Plus, you're only going into a ravine located near the valley. If you enter the valley, they will notice you and you will be killed on sight. Alright, got any tips on what to do down there? Shiro asked while stretching her body. Not much other than keep your guard up. Hades trials aren't too complicated. Sometimes it could be as easy as picking a single weapon from a pile of trash, or it could be as hard as traveling to the underworld and stealing something before escaping. It depends on how lucky you are, I suppose. Quella replied as Shiro nodded her head. Not too bad then. She smiled. She hoped that it wasn't like Artemis' test since she could have done that one without much of a time limit. However, for this one, she was surrounded by monsters that could end her in an instant. Taking a deep breath, she took a few steps back before running full speed, jumping over the edge. She dived down for a few seconds before unfurling her wings. Follow me quickly. Seeing the butterfly navigate through the valley, Shiro didn't hesitate and followed closely behind it. Suddenly, a feeling of danger washed over as both she and the butterfly stopped and dived down as fast as they could. Crack. Glancing above her, she could see the giant mandibles of an insect retreating back to the stone walls before, camouflaging themselves quickly. Christ, this place is filled with danger. Shiro clicked her tongue. Amen. Keep up the pace and keep your guard up. Sometimes they can attack before I can even warn you, like just now. Would have loved it for you to tell me at the beginning, but okay. Shiro forced a smile, ducking and weaving through the ravine. The two traveled for a long while before landing at the very bottom, quickly furling up her wings. She ducked behind some rocks with Quella's familiar as they watched a few of the monsters fly past them. Once she was sure the coast was clear, Shiro sighed in relief. Now that they were at the bottom, Shiro looked around and saw several skeletons with broken pieces of armor and weapons. Ignore them for now. We need to grab the chance for the blessed weapon as soon as we can. Quella reminded as Shiro nodded her head. Don't worry. I know which is more important, and I think I also know where the weapon is. Shiro smiled while glancing down at her hand. There was a faint mark that seemed to shimmer ever so slightly whenever she pointed it in front of them. Recognizing the sigil belonging to Hades, Quella was shocked and wondered where she had obtained it. After all, she didn't have Hades' divinity. But that was a question for later. Right now, they need to hurry up before they're spotted by the monsters in this ravine. Looking around her, Shiro made sure that there were no monsters around before dashed to where the sigil reacted most intensely, using the sigil as a guide. They soon arrived before a hole entrance behind one of the boulders, furrowing her brows. She contemplated to herself for a moment before jumping in, positioning herself so that she didn't hurt herself too bad. Shiro slid down the hole. During her journey down, she noticed that the temperature seemed to be increasing despite the lack of a fire. I'll check on the situation ahead. Nodding her head, Shiro watched as the butterfly went on ahead. After a few moments, she returned. You can go ahead without worry. This is going to a place that is similar to hell in terms of the scenery, but that's part of Hades' test for the weapon. Quella reassured. Hearing this, Shiro sighed in relief and stopped slowing down her descent, traveling at full speed. She could see a faint orange glow at the end of the tunnel, slowing herself down just enough so that she landed softly without any problems. Shiro looked around and raised her eyebrows, despite them being in a cave. She couldn't see the ceiling and the entrance to the tunnel that she had just gone through was currently floating in the AI in front of her was a hellish landscape with pools of lava flowing into the distance while large black chains hung from the top with the base being hidden by the smoke. She was currently standing in the middle of a large island where there was little to no cover available. Floating in the middle was a single set of chains that was surrounded by a dark scarlet aura. Understanding that this was the weapon, Shiro raised her guard and approached with caution. Just as she took a single step, a giant magic array expanded out above her. Large black anchors slammed against the pool of lava, causing a rain of burning hot lava to spew towards her. Stepping back, she avoided most of the droplets, but a few managed to land on her jacket and burn a hole through the surface. TCH, I like this jacket too. Shiro clicked her tongue with annoyance, cracking her neck. She jumped up slightly before bursting into a dash. Bang! Dropping a second set of chains. More lava splashed towards her, but Shiro was able to dodge. Most of it despite having to sacrifice some of her jacket, which really annoyed her, but there was nothing she could do about that. Once she was around 20 meters from the set of chains, she felt danger ahead of her as a shadow of something huge could be seen looming over her body. Glancing up, a giant illusionary image of a gladiator could be seen holding one of the large chains and swinging it towards her. Despite most of the chains being hidden by the smoke, Shiro could still see where it would roughly land due to the moving smoke. Quickly dashing to the side, she managed to avoid it just in time as a deep imprint of the chains could be seen on the ground. To make matters worse, lava started to flow in from the edge and filled the crater in, reducing the amount of room she had to work with. Furrowing her brows, she quickly dashed towards the chains. The gladiator managed to slam down his chains one more time, which severely reduced the amount of land she could use, but that was fine. Now that she was in front of the chains, Shiro reached out with her left hand and grabbed the first section. Test of Hades Stage 2. Defeat the Underworld Guardian and retrieve the chains of Hades. Seeing this notification, Shiro watched as the illusionary image of the gladiator slowly shrunk down to the size of the Minotaur. In his hands were two chains similar to her chains, but one had a hook on the other end. Glancing down at the chains of Hades in her left hand, Shiro narrowed her eyes and dashed towards the Guardian. Twisting her body, she swung the chain towards the Guardian, who blocked the strike with his arms, tugging it as hard as she could. She flung her body towards him before he could react. Wrapping some loops of the chain around her left arm, she summoned her bow and fired an arrow at the Guardian's head at point-blank range. Bang! Watching the Guardian stumble back a few steps, Shiro smirked and flipped onto his back. Wrapping the chains around his neck, she pulled as hard as she could. However, his muscles were hard to compress with her current strength, so at most she made him feel a little uncomfortable, but that was it. Reaching towards her, the Guardian tried to grab Shiro, but she was too nimble, and with his giant body moving around with a simple task for Shiro, she didn't even need to unfurl her wings. Of course, that did not mean she didn't activate her divinity at all. That would be stupid. Aside from the wings, she had already activated all the bonus features such as the boon of rivalry and the boon of force. While this may seem like an easy fight in general, Shiro was actually under a lot of pressure as sweat was beginning to fill her forehead. While she didn't know what properties the Guardian's weapons had, she felt an overwhelming amount of danger from them and knew that should she be hit, she'd be in a pickle. After avoiding his onslaught of grabs along with her futile attempts to damage him with her chain, she understood that the difficulty of completing this trial was roughly 2 to 3 divinities, since the physical prowess bestowed upon you by one divinity was clearly not enough. Thankfully, though, she had her bow to bridge that gap, kicking off the Guardian's body. She unfurled her wings and sent a concentrated barrage of arrows towards his head, which succeeded in knocking him on his back. But before he fell, he lashed out with his chains, which were surprisingly fast. Dodging to the side, Shiro flinched slightly as the wind generated by the force of the chain had actually split her skin. TCH. Clicking her tongue, Shiro glanced down at the blood that flowed down the side of her arm. However, Before she could wipe the blood away, she felt lightheaded as her body swayed ever so slightly. Huh. She furrowed her brows in confusion as this condition only lasted for a short moment. I think I figured out what the chains do. Quella's voice rang out besides her as the butterfly landed on her shoulder. Took you a while. Shiro sighed. Naturally. This was the first time you were hit by them. Even slightly. Quella replied. Anyways, from what I've seen, it's good that you were barely damaged by that hit, since if it had hit you completely, your soul would have been dragged out. Normally, this wouldn't be a problem since people with 2 divinities have received enough reinforcement to withstand the force, but you only have one, so it'll be tougher on you. I'm being serious in that you should probably give up on this, since if you're even hit once, you'll die. Quella warned as Shiro furrowed her brows. Do you know this weapon then? Shiro asked while holding up the chains of Hades. I do, and I know that it's one of the higher, better blessed weapons. But the risks are too high. We can try to find this again when you get a second divinity. Well, that settles it. Since this is one of the better weapons, I can't let this opportunity split out of my grasp. Shiro grinned. Are you crazy? Yes. Yes, I am. If you die, no dash. I have no plans in dying, don't worry. However, for my personal goals, I can't let such a good weapon slip out of my grasp. What kind of personal goals are you even talking about for you to take this risk? The kind that involves filling up the rest of my slots with the 5 primordial divinities. Shiro grinned before pulling back as hard as she could on her bow, sending an arrow towards the guardian. She dashed towards him without hesitation while Quella's butterfly hovered in the air. Her mind was currently in turmoil as the personal goal of Shiro's was something truly outrageous, while there had been 1 or 2 people obtaining one of the primordial divinities in the past thanks to their increased slots as a result of the environment. None had obtained more than 1 primordial divinity, and Shiro wanted to obtain all 5. That looking at Shiro, who was currently fighting the guardian, Quella only sighed and remembered what Shiro had told her on their way here. Chances are low, but they're never zero. There is always a possibility, no matter how outrageous. Firing wave after wave of arrows at point-blank range while dodging his grabs, Shiro prevented him from attacking her with his chains. After all, they were the real problems. In terms of danger level, his fists were much lower despite her running around his body, despite being an illusionary image. The state of the guardian was rather strange. It was like the physical illusions that Shiro could make back on Earth, only transparent. She could stand on him, hit him, and even grab him, but his body was semi-transparent. It was a rather strange sight, but Shiro dismissed it since she's seen weirder situations before. Firing another arrow at his head, Shiro panted lightly since all this running around and dodging his grabs had started to put a toll on her body. However, it was much better than trying to dodge the chains, since that'd truly be dangerous. Kicking off his chest, she landed on the ground and watched him stumble back. It's been quite a while. Shiro mused to herself, since she had been able to kill her bosses rather quickly due to her crazy buffs and armor penetration, but in the Forgotten Realm, it was hard to obtain the same effect, so each boss she fights had to be one done with caution. Watching him stumble back, she raised her guard since she felt like he was charging up to do something. Suddenly, chains exploded out from under her feet as Shiro quickly jumped up and made herself hover with her wings. However, it wasn't over. Bursting from the ceiling were more chains, but it wasn't the large kind. It was hundreds of small chains charging towards her. Clicking her tongue, Shiro knew that she only had 2 choices. Either dodge them all or deflect them. She wasn't too keen on the latter option, since she didn't know if the chains could be controlled or if they had the same properties as the Guardian's chains. If it did, that would be rather bad for her. Opting for the dodging option, she dived down and furled her wings. Concentrating on her footwork, she tried her best at dodging all of the chains and was rather successful. The only bad part was that she kept getting holes in her jacket, which infuriated her since she didn't have another set of outfits after this one. Halfway through dodging the chains, Shiro noticed that it was trying to lock her up in a makeshift prison, so she quickly dashed around the arena. She had to be careful on where she ran, since if the chain landed in the lava, the sudden splash would be unavoidable. While Shiro was focused on dodging, the Guardian had stood back up and recovered somewhat, narrowing his eyes towards Shiro. He pulled his arm back and swung his chains towards her just as she dodged one of the chains falling from the ceiling. Seeing the sudden appearance of the chain, Shiro gritted her teeth and jumped up. Using the hook at the end of the chains as the vaulting box, she narrowly flipped her body over. SSS. Taking a sharp breath, she watched as a purple aura coated the palm of her hand. Dodging more chains, Shiro furrowed her brows when the purple aura didn't disappear. Is this like a stack of something? Shiro thought to herself and frowned since it could be bad if it was, glaring towards the guardian. She whipped her chain around the hook before using the momentum to quickly dodge some of the chains, turning his body. The guardian wanted to slam it down so that Shiro would get crushed, but all she had to do was unfurl her wings and begin to fly. Strangely enough, the chain seemed to be rather magical in the fact that it would continue to lengthen like a certain staff belonging to a monkey. Unless she willed it, the chains would not shrink. Diving down, she quickly had the chains unhooked from the guardian's weapon before backing off since the tail end of his chain was already heading towards her. Thinking about it for a moment, Shiro had an idea and her lips curled up into a grin. Unsummoning her bow, she grabbed the chains of Hades with both hands and dashed towards the boss, increasing the length of the chains so that it would hang loosely around the guardian. She dashed behind him and checked if she could exploit a certain weakness. Unfortunately, there was nothing there, so at most she could use it to taunt him, but that was enough. Summoning her bow, she pulled back and fired an arrow which lifted the guardian's body up ever so slightly, but it wasn't enough to completely lift him off the ground. However, that wasn't her main goal. Her main goal was to taunt him, and she had achieved it with ease, glaring at her with rage-filled eyes. His muscles bulged as she could tell that he wanted to kill her with everything he's got. Don't be so mad. I don't poke the ass as much as I used to, so you should take this with honor. Shiro taunted with a smug smile, which would make anyone want to punch her in the face, and the guardian was no exception, slamming his hook forward with everything he's got. Shiro grinned, throwing a loop of her chain towards the hook. She almost wanted to jump for joy when she saw that it was hooked onto the weapon, but before she could celebrate, she had to avoid the hook or else she'd be dead. Diving down as quickly as she could, she felt the wind crash into her back and sent her hurling towards the ground, but that was okay, lengthening the chain so that it didn't affect her. She watched as the loosely wrapped chains tightened around the guardian's body. Asterisk crack. One of the loops snapped against his neck, cracking his neck back as she could see his neck becoming more and more deformed, with the chains tightened all around him. The guardian tried to pry the chains off his body, but it was to no avail. Watching the guardian struggle, Shiro thought about it for a short moment before wrapping her chain around one of the chains hanging from the ceiling, stopping her chain from lengthening. The hook was suddenly hit by a strong force, tightening the chains around the guardian's body even more so. Asterisk bang. Ripping through the guardian's neck, the chains shredded through his body, destroying his illusionary image, with the guardian dead. The hook flickered for a moment before disappearing, and the same happened to the surroundings. You have obtained the chains of Hades. This chain can be extended and retracted at will for a maximum of 1 mile. Every hit you do with this chain applies a single stack on the target, and the stacks can be used in the following ways. Consume 5 stacks to grant 10% attack speed, 10% attack damage, or 10% armor penetration. Consume 10 stacks to grant 20% attack speed, 20% attack damage, 20% armor penetration, or 2% chance of soul steal. For every 10 stacks after this, soul steal chance increases by 2% with a limit of 30%. In addition to this, you also reinforce your body by 5% per 10 stacks for a maximum of 40%. When consumed, stack count reset. Stack effects don't transfer to a second target. Stack effects only last for a minute. Reading the description, Shiro raised her eyebrows in surprise. For her, this weapon was simply amazing since she could reinforce her body without a second divinity, though. It was a little unfortunate that the stack effects don't transfer, so she can't just keep a rock monster in her back and have him carry 100 stacks for her to use. If she could do that, then she'd be able to always keep the 40% body reinforcement on for more than just 1 minute. Retracting the chain, she wondered if it'd retract like her bow, and with that thought, it faded into her sigil, with 2 blessed weapons in her hands, 1 long range and 1 mid-ranged. She was rather prepared, but Shiro knew that this was nowhere near what she needed if she wanted to complete the primordial towers. Shaking her head, she had to wait for some decent armor and a sword before even thinking about it. We should leave, Quella said as the monsters are bound to return soon since the weapon was now under Shiro's control. Amen. Nodded her head. Shiro looked around to make sure that she hadn't missed anything before climbing into the tunnel, since she was now climbing up rather than falling. It took her quite a while before she was finally able to reach the surface. Her wings weren't exactly helpful either since the space was cramped. So how did you get Hades' sigil? As far as I know, you haven't got a second divinity yet, and the first belonged to Nike. In addition to this, the sigil isn't like average divinities. Quella asked as this was on her mind. Well, one of the dryads told me that this is something called a dormant sigil. It's similar to a divinity, I suppose. But so far I don't know how to use them. Shiro replied with a shake of her head. She decided to hide some of the truth from Quella, since she didn't need to know that she had met the gods she looked up to in her world and had even pissed off quite a few of them. Plus, she had obtained several gods' blessings which included those from the 12 main gods. Since she couldn't use the power, there was no point telling Quella. I see. That's quite odd, but it doesn't seem like it'll activate. I believe the only reason it activated this time was due to the fact that we were close to one of Hades' most powerful weapons. If it was a weaker weapon, the reaction might be a little weaker. Maybe. Do you think there's a chance of more corrupted creatures appearing where the Hymena died? We didn't exactly clean up the goo, and the spider was mutated in the end. Shiro reminded. Don't worry about that. I've already sent a message out to my sisters, and they'll deal with it. Of course, if we happen to see any mutated monsters on the way back, it's in our best interest to kill them immediately. Quella reassured as Shiro nodded her head, sneaking around a little at the bottom of the ravine. Shiro tried her luck with some of the weapons that might have been dropped here, but none of them were up to standard. They were either average or too broken to be used, which was unfortunate, but she literally obtained the chains of Hades, so she shouldn't complain. However, due to her actions of wanting to seek out some more weapons, quite a few of the monsters had returned, and now flying out would be akin to seeking her own death. Don't say anything. I should have just left when I had the chance. Shiro sighed. I didn't say anything, though. Quella replied with confusion in her voice. Nothing. Shiro shook her head. She was so used to Nimue or Madison turning to her the moment she made a mistake, but now that she was here in this trial, it was kind of lonely without them. Sighing softly while looking for a chance to escape, Shiro grabbed an old sword and chipped away at a small stone. This one's for you, Nimue, Shiro muttered while carving the stone into a tiny table and flipping it with a flick of her finger once. She had flipped the table for Nimue. She stood up and unfurled her wings, stomping down. She soared up into the sky since this was the perfect chance to rush up. All of the monsters had mostly moved to the side now, so she had quite a large opening to escape from. However, this didn't stop a few of the monsters from charging at her. Most of them were insectoid-type monsters, while there were a few who were more reptilian. Closest monster that had come to hitting her was a winged beetle of sorts with an extendable neck, flapping its wings slightly. It propelled its head forward in an attempt to eat Shiro up in one go, quickly dodging to the side. She summoned her chains of Hades and whipped it towards him. Cling cling, rattling slightly from the clashing of metal against carapace. Corrosion marks could be seen on the beetle's shell as the first stack was applied, but since she was forced to defend herself, it gave the others a chance to catch up. Not good. Quella shouted out in a panic. No sh*t. I can see it for myself. Shiro roared back as she dived down and narrowly dodged the net of monsters crashing against each other above her, quickly switching her focus onto the beetle. She tugged on her chain and dragged it towards her. Second stack, third stack, fourth stack, applying 3 more stacks in quick succession. She twisted her body and kicked it as hard as she could, launching herself away from an attack that was directed to her back. Summoning her bow, she quickly fired an arrow into the eye of a serpent that was hiding near the back that was trying to launch a sneak attack against her. Looking at the situation from her familiar, all Quella could see was a swarm of monsters rushing towards Shiro as she was forced deeper into the ravine, with the surface getting further and further away from her reach. The worst part about it was that she couldn't do anything right now since she could only observe with her familiar. However, the body of a monster suddenly flew past her and slammed against the wall. Bang, cracking against the jagged rocks sticking out the side of the ravine. Green blood and organs could be seen splattered against the wall as the beetle-like monster was killed in an instant. Looking at the gap that this had suddenly created, Quella managed to see Shiro standing in the middle of the monster horde with a malevolent glare. Dark aura surrounded her body as howls of ghosts could be heard roaring out besides her. Her clothes were drenched with blood as a deep gash could be seen on her waist along with several cuts and bruises around her limbs. 20 stacks. Plus 20% attack speed, 20% attack damage, 20% armor penetration, 4% soul steal. Gritting her teeth, she glared at the monsters surrounding her and released as much killing intent as she could. Out of my way, she shouted out before summoning her bow, notching as many arrows as she could thanks to the 20% increase to attack speed. Shiro fired the arrows. Asterisk bang. Exploding out like a blast from a shotgun. Several arrows could be seen, piercing through the bodies of the monsters while one or two rapidly decayed thanks to the 4% soul steal that were triggered through sheer luck. Using this opening to rush up into the sky, Shiro shrank her chain and returned it to her side. When she was roughly 10 meters from the top, a serpent jumped up and tried to bite at Shiro's ankles before she could leave. Piss off. Shiro glared back in anger since she was furious right now. Not only was her outfit ruined, she had sustained quite a few injuries right now, which meant she had to wait for some medicine to arrive in order to heal. Plus, with these kinds of injuries, it would be a miracle if she could actually make it back on time. Flicking her wrist, she sent the chain flying towards the serpent as it slammed against its jaw, dislocating it in an instant before breaking some of the serpent's teeth. Seeing this, most of the monsters quickly backed off, making it out of the ravine. Shiro didn't waste any time and flew towards the city of Vox. Quella managed to catch up besides her as Shiro only glanced towards her. Order me some of the best medical ointments for one of the towns. I need to get this injury treated soon. Shiro ordered while glancing down at her waist that had been cut deeply. She was currently holding the wound with her left hand and tried her best to stop it from bleeding, but it was rather hard to accomplish that with her wings flapping behind her. Amen. I've already called for some. If you land in the town of Offrit, it should be there when you arrive. Quella replied as there was some urgency in her voice since she knew Shiro needed help as soon as possible. Remembering where the town was located, Shiro rushed towards its location as it was on the way to the city of Vox. Landing roughly, Shiro furrowed her brows and coughed up a mouthful of blood. She was still a while away from the town of Offrit, but if she kept flying, she could almost pass out in the air and fall to her doom. Sitting next to a rock, she glanced down at the blood that was escaping from her wound and frowned. Come on, just a bit further. The town isn't too far away. Quella encouraged as Shiro only rolled her eyes. Yeah, I know, but it's kinda hard when I can barely feel my body. Shiro rolled her eyes before trying her best to stand up again, summoning her bow. She used it as a crutch and started to limp towards the town, with a trail of blood behind her. Her face was turning pale as her vision started to blur, but Shiro gritted her teeth and powered on. Say, Quella, will the medicine be there when I arrive? Because if it doesn't, I'm actually gonna die. Shiro asked. It will. I've paid extra to have them use it on you the moment they spot you. How would they know it's me? Shiro asked with a forced smile as she needed something to distract her so that she could keep going forward. There aren't any white-haired girls on the brink of death other than you. Fair point. Shiro chuckled, which only caused her to cough up some blood, so laughing's probably advised against. She joked while taking another step forward. I think there are many things that should be advised against, but yes, laughing is one of them right now, but I doubt that's your main concern. Quella sighed. I know it's not my main concern, but I need something to distract me, okay? Having the constant thought that my stomach is King bleeding doesn't help. Shiro forced a smile. All right. Sorry. Quella nodded as having a distraction from your impending doom is rather beneficial in pushing yourself to go further. Walking towards the town, she was roughly 10 minutes away when she collapsed against the road /side. You have got to be kidding me. Shiro muttered as her consciousness became faint, gritting her teeth. She tried her best to muster her strength, but it was to no use. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the distance and was currently running towards her. Despite not being able to see his appearance properly, his figure reminded her of Nantion, sighing softly. She closed her eyes since her body had no more strength. Hashtag waking up. Shiro snapped her eyes open and sat up straight. Summoning her chains, she glared at her surroundings with caution, so aggressive for someone who has just woken up. Quella sighed as she walked into the room. Oh, it's just you. Shiro sighed before looking down. However, when she saw that she was bandaged from the neck down, her heart stopped for a moment. Who bandaged me? She asked with a low tone. Don't worry, it was just me. The guy who carried you here was the one who carried the medicine. While you were on your way here, I had been running here as well, so don't worry. No one saw you but me. Quella reassured as Shiro sighed in relief, moving her body a little. Shiro furrowed her brows when she felt some pain coming from her waist. I don't move too much just yet. The medicine is working away at your wounds, but they don't magically close up immediately, you know? It still takes a bit of time. Quella stopped her from getting off the bed. How long was I out? Shiro asked. Don't worry, it's only been 3 hours. You need to recuperate a little, then you should be back in shape. Quella said as Shiro nodded her head. Do you happen to have an outfit for me? My old one was kind of horrific, ripped and bloodied. Quella finished with a soft chuckle. Amen. I brought some spare clothes that I had lying around. They should fit you, but they're a bit big in certain areas. Quella said as Shiro tilted her head. What do you mean? The bosom. Mine are a little larger than average, so the clothes might be a bit big. Quella replied as Shiro sighed. Now you see, if you said this half a year ago, I would have hit you since I had the body of a child. Lucky you. Shiro shrugged, however this response only confused Quella. How could one be in the body of a child half a year ago? Did they suddenly grow up? If she had asked Shiro that same question, she would have said yes. After resting in the bed for a little longer, Shiro got up and removed all of her bandages. Looking at her body, she sighed in relief seeing that there are no scars. Oh my, who were your parents? They must be very beautiful to have someone like you as their child. Quella raised her eyebrows as Shiro nodded her head. My parents are indeed beautiful. As for their relationship, it's a little too vigorous considering their age. Shiro's smile twitched slightly when she remembered that her father was punished with quite a long dry spell thanks to her leaving the house, which meant that they were rather active before that. Shivering from the image of her parents doing it in the bed, Shiro cursed her mind and started to get herself dressed. The worst part was that her memory was basically perfect, and she even remembered some scenes from her childhood when she accidentally walked in on her parents. Before that memory could fully resurface, Shiro slammed the brakes and sent both thoughts into the deep crevices of her database where she hardly visits. That way, they won't be occupying their mind. After changing into Quella's old clothes, Shiro looked down with a blank expression before looking back at Quella. Are you making fun of me? Shiro asked as the size of the chemise was quite big and the bottom reached her knees. It was like when a child borrowed their parents' clothes and wore it for the first time. Shaking her head with a small snicker, Quella excused herself and went to make some food. Sighing softly, Shiro put the rest of the clothes on. Once she changed into the outfit, she looked kind of like a nun mixed with a mage thanks to the robe. There were some accessories on the outfit, but not much. Moving around a little, Shiro wasn't too bothered by the spaciousness of the chest since it was sorted out thanks to a few more layers. Walking into the kitchen, she saw some food set up on the table. I'm surprised. Shiro raised her eyebrows since the presentation of the food was much better than the food she had seen on Earth. After spending a few 100 years as a librarian, you'll figure out a few things here and there. One of the heroes of the past really enjoyed food, so I cooked for her often. Quella smiled and set the final plate on the table. So do you own this house or something? Shiro asked while glancing around. Nope. I borrowed it from this family for a day after paying them some money. Quella replied as Shiro paused for a moment before shrugging. If she was poor and someone offered her some money to borrow their house for a while, then she would say yes as well. We'll start going back when we finish the meal. I've got more bounties to complete so that I can actually afford the sword and armor. Shiro sighed. If you don't have enough money by the end of the deadline, I can lend you some. Me and my sisters have been saving up for quite a few years, so we have some spare funds. Though there are only a handful of people who are richer than us in the world. Quella smiled. Staying silent, Shiro somewhat understood how her party felt. You don't just casually announce that you're basically one of the richest people in the world, starting with we have some spare funds. Finishing her meal, Shiro and Quella started to make their way back to Vox. Since it was taking a while, Shiro eventually picked Quella up in a princess carry and flew the rest of the way. After arriving in Vox, the first thing that Shiro did was go to the mercenary hall and report the completion of her bounty with the Himina, with some more gold in her pockets. Shiro was a little closer to affording the sword that Maria was going to craft, but with the time that she had spent chasing the Himina among other things, she wasn't going to be able to make enough gold in the time to purchase the sword. Eventually, she borrowed some gold from Quella and decided to spend some of this time doing bounties on the side to pay off her debt to Quella. Mostly, she would help out at the library and organize a few of the books that people forget to put back in the right places, since that was usually Quella's job. But now that Shiro had come to help her, she was given more chances to rest. Today was the date that Maria had set for Shiro, as her sword would be done today. Tidying up the final shelf of the day, Shiro sighed in satisfaction before massaging her neck. "I'm heading out for the sword now," Shiro called out, since she needed to let Quella know that she wasn't in. "Amen, be back soon. You still need to earn enough money for the armor," Quella replied with a smile as Shiro shrugged. For one of the richest people in the world, she was awfully stringent on debts. Of course, Shiro didn't mind, since this was perfect for her, vaulting over the edge of the barrier. She unfurled her wings and glided to the bottom of the library before dashing out of the front gates. Looking at this, Quella only shook her head with a soft chuckle. Making her way through the streets of Vox, Shiro arrived at the blacksmith's and saw Maria waiting with a grin and a crystal case. "You've arrived." She nodded her head while glancing towards Shiro. "Amen. I've brought the payment too." Shiro smiled while patting her coin pouch. "Leave it at the side. Come, sit down and look at this blade." Maria stood up and dragged Shiro towards her chair, setting the crystal case on the table in front of them. She flicked a few of the locks open. "Do you want to know why I had to use a special case? It's because this sword is rather aggressive. Your fighting style is adaptive and aggressive at the same time. To focus the strengths of the sword around these traits, I had to obtain some rather unique metals and materials for this. The outcome was great, but this kid is a feisty one," Maria explained and opened the case. Just as she opened this case, Maria quickly tilted her head to the side as some hair was cut. "TSK. I'm the one who made you, yet you still strike at me." Maria clicked her tongue before presenting the blade to Shiro. The blade was crafted from a strange black marble-like material that had a white mist pattern swirl across the surface of the material. The guard was made from a clear silver with a small red bead in the center, while the handle had several runic patterns etched on the side. The overall size of the guard wasn't too big, as it reminded her of a smaller version of the average guard. Raising her hand, Shiro reached towards the blade but immediately felt killing intent directed towards her. However, compared to the killing intent she felt from Akram that the God-Slayer had presented to her, this was a piece of cake. Smirking slightly, Shiro focused her killing intent at the blade before boldly grabbing the handle. "Oh my!" Maria raised her eyebrow in surprise, seeing as how Shiro was rather fearless in grabbing a blade that literally threatened to kill you. Feeling some cuts on her palm, Shiro increased her grip strength and slashed the blade beside her. Bang! A split suddenly appeared in the workshop as quite a few of the blacksmiths were startled from the sudden sound, feeling several glares at her. Shiro scratched her head awkwardly and apologized, looking at the sword. She understood that it was still trying to fight against her control. "What did you even make this with?" Shiro asked after a short pause. "Underworld soul metal. Ever heard of trials that took you to the underworld? Well, the underworld soul metal is a special material from the manacles that restrain the souls while they're being tortured. After being tempered by several souls coming into contact with the metal, it has become highly resistant to contact, along with the fact that it can ignore armor to a certain extent since it aims for the soul," Maria explained as Shiro nodded her head. Thinking about it for a moment, she flicked the sword up and grabbed it with her left hand instead, as both the sigil and the chains were on her left hand. The moment she grabbed the sword, her sigil lit up ever so slightly, as only Maria noticed the mark on Shiro's hand, widening her eyes. She watched as a dark purple aura wrapped around the edge of the blade. "Interesting," Shiro muttered, since the chains were now connected to the sword from the guard. If she willed it, the chains would disconnect from the sword, and she could use the sword separately, but it was better to leave the two together. Potential unlocked. Nivlim, Blade of Hades will have the properties of the Chains of Hades, but with some bonuses. Maximum soul steal chance increased from 30% to 40%. Maximum body reinforcement increased from 40% to 50%. Stack bonuses have been increased by 5%. 5 stacks equals 15% attack speed, damage, and armor penetration. 10 stacks equals 25% attack speed, damage, and armor penetration. Stack effects will now last for 1 minute and 30 seconds. Reading the description of Nivlam, Shiro raised her eyebrow in surprise since the sword had calmed down a lot more now. While there was still some discomfort and a strange sense of stubbornness, it was at least willing to listen to her, much like Error 403. Unsummoning her chains. She watched as the sword also disappeared before a faint sword-like sigil flicked on her hand and faded away. Did you just turn my sword into a blessed weapon? Maria asked while blinking her eyes in shock. Seems like it. Due to the metals that you used along with the nature of my current weapon, it seems like they were pretty compatible. It even got a name now. Shiro replied with a smile. Quickly rummaging through her things to grab a note, she looked at Shiro. Please take it out. I need to make a note of this. Maria asked as her eyes were shining with excitement. Amen. Nodding her head, she brought Nivlam out and set it on the table. Recent discoveries. As this is the first of its kind, it cannot be confirmed just yet, however the possibility is there. Should a blacksmith use a unique type of metal or material that has a rather large connection with a certain blessed weapon, there is a chance for fusion. Current observable phenomenon that may cause this is for the weapon to have a kind of essence that lets it choose the wielder. When the fusion is complete, the weapon will apparently gain a name. As stated before, this is the first of its kind, so this could be a unique scenario. The only weapon I've seen is Nivlam, a blade that had been fused together with a chain that seemed to be Hades' blessed weapon. Further observations will be held at later times when possible. Experimentations will be carried out. Maria muttered as she quickly sketched out an image of the blade. Thank you for letting me record this. Do you have any other blessed weapons that you would like to test this out with? She asked eagerly. I do, but it's a bow. Shiro nodded her head. Hearing that it's a bow, Maria clicked her tongue and sighed heavily. Since it's a bow, there's nothing that can be done. She muttered before looking away and rummaging through the rest of her things, taking it as her sign to leave. Shiro set down the gold on the table and made her way back to the library, unsummoning Nivlam. She had a bit of time before her armor was done, so she could probably test out this blade a few times. Once she received her armor, she was going to see which primordial trial is best for her in her current state. Right, so care to explain to me why you're joining? I thought you would send your familiar. Shiro asked as she glanced towards Quella, who was coming along with her. Well, a familiar can't help you out if you almost die now, can it? After last time, I think it's better for me to come with you on the journey. Quella replied with a smile. I mean, what about the library? I thought the library is important to you. Shiro asked. Oh, of course it is. However, for the only person to have 6 slots without our direct interference along with 2 blessed weapons, one having improved itself, I can't let you die on your own now, can I? Quella chuckled. I suppose not. Do you have anyone else to look after the library for now? Shiro asked curiously. I have, don't worry. They were the one who looked after it before you came, since I can't stay in the library forever. However, since I hired you to pay off your debt, they were given some time to rest. I see. How come I never saw them then? Because the kid doesn't like to talk to women other than me. He's got a bit of a phobia. Thought that only applies to casual talks. He can do things just fine when it comes to professional standards. Quella snickered as Shiro raised her eyebrow. Then why doesn't he just talk to me with professional standards? Shiro asked. Because you're too beautiful? I don't know how the mind of a young boy works. Quella shrugged. Aren't you like a few hundred years old? Surely you would understand it by now. I'm insulted. Don't casually mention my age like that, okay? I may be old, but it's still rude. Quella sighed. I mean, I'm also a few hundred years old if that means anything to you. Shiro sighed. You are? But isn't your body 18? Quella raised her eyebrows. Mental age, I'm a few hundred. Body age, I'm 18 right now. Shiro replied with a casual shrug. I suppose that accounts for something at least. Amen. Anyways, our target is in front of us. Shiro narrowed her eyes at the Cyclops sitting on a fallen tree in the distance. Despite their distance from the monster, They could get a rough sense of how big it was since it was towering over the fallen three. If she was to stand next to him, Shiro understood that she wouldn't even be able to reach his kneecaps. Next to the Cyclops was a large wooden club that had been tainted with a slight reddish hue, most likely from the amount of people it had killed. "You want a hand? Since I'm here in person, I can do more than just watch," Quella asked. "Sure. I want to see what you can do." Shiro nodded her head as Quella smiled, massaging her shoulders. Quella snapped her fingers and pushed out with her left palm, muttering something under her breath. A giant magic circle appeared in front of her as motes of light appeared around them. Converging above the magic circle, the lights combined into the shape of a giant golden lion. "Go," giving it a simple command. Quella jumped on the lion's back before charging towards the Cyclops, raising her eyebrow. Shiro only smiled as she unfurled her wings and summoned Nivlim into her hands. Holding the sword with her right hand and the chains with her left, she followed behind Quella. Hearing the sound of approaching enemies, the Cyclops glanced back and widened its eye in surprise, standing up quickly. He grabbed his club and tried to swing toward the incoming Quella, clapping her hands together. Quella pushed them out as a large hawk made from light sprang towards the Cyclops and grabbed his wrist. "Arg, let go!" The Cyclops roared out while trying to get the hawk to stop biting his wrist. Despite his power, the hawk secured its beaks around the wrist with a death grip, refusing to let go no matter how much the Cyclops struggled, slamming the hawk against the ground. The Cyclops saw its figure shimmer for a moment before returning to normal, understanding that he could probably destroy the hawk in a few more hits. The Cyclops narrowed his eye and tried to slam it down once more. However, Quella had already arrived with her golden lion, *Ura. Roaring out with anger, the lion lunged at the Cyclops, biting away at his neck as it tried to wrestle him down to the ground, stepping back a few times and stabilizing his body. Preventing it from falling, the Cyclops glared at the familiars and cracking his neck, pulling his head back. He was about to return the lion's bite when Shiro flickered next to his legs with her wings unfurled, smirking slightly. She twisted her body and threw the sword portion of Nivlim, watching it wrap around the leg. Shiro narrowed her eyes before tugging at the chains as hard as she could. Due to the grass stones beneath his feet, the Cyclops wasn't able to get a stable footing and fell on his back, getting the chains to retract. Shiro used the force to propel her body at the Cyclops, unsummoning and summoning the blade into her hand. Shiro took a deep breath and started to slash away at the fallen monster. 1 stack, 2 stacks, 3 stacks. While Shiro was applying the stack effects of her weapon, Quella had her familiars attack the Cyclops while she herself was setting up a new spell if Shiro was to take Quella back to Earth. The current spell she was preparing could be comparable to something that a peak tier 4 and 5 being could cast with relative amounts of ease thanks to the system. Glaring at the Cyclops, Quella brought her hands down. Suddenly, 2 spell circles appeared on either side of the Cyclops. 2 golden serpents emerged and snapped away at his limbs, pinning him in place. Seeing Quella summon familiar after familiar, Shiro couldn't help but wonder what it would be like should she fight against her seriously. While she may be able to get past most of the familiars, if Quella was prepared and summoned them beforehand, she could be in some danger since familiars like hers could be sacrificed endlessly. Should that happen, all she needed to do would be to pin her down and she'll be dead to make matters worse. Her stacks only apply one target before consumption, meaning getting her power up from a large crowd would be hard since the target could just run away before she could get a large number of stacks. However, that doesn't mean Shiro couldn't kill her. The only time she would have problems would be if Quella pre-summoned her familiars. If not, she could easily overwhelm the librarian. Goodness, when did I make a habit of simulating combat with those that I meet? I can't be thinking about killing them all the time. Shiro sighed. She was the mother of 3 children, so she couldn't be a murder hobo all the time now. But since she was in the trial, she can go murdering all she wants. Thinking of this, her smile slowly curved up into a grin as killing intent flowed out from her body, collecting 10 stacks of her Nivlim. Shiro consumed them all as a purple aura erupted out from her body, plus 25% attack speed, damage, and armor penetration. Jumping up into the air, Shiro summoned her bow. "Stay clear of the blast zone," she shouted out as Quella immediately looked towards her and understood what she wanted to do, summoning a horse. She switched mounts and allowed the rest of her familiars to pin down the Cyclops. Since her stacks only worked with Nivlim, it meant that she couldn't summon an arrow and have the same effects. She has to use the sword. Notching the sword onto her bow, Shiro narrowed her eyes and pulled back as hard as she could. With her chains having a length of 1 mile, that would be her range limit, which wasn't too bad, all things considered. Suddenly, she felt error 403 stir as the red circuits appeared on her arm. Seeing the sword, it jumped around in excitement and lashed itself onto the blade. *TSSS, sending sparks of electricity flying off the blade while red circuits coated the surface. Shiro watched as the aura around her sword intensified. Chuckling for a moment, she let go of the sword. Boom! Firing out of her bow like a shot from her rail cannon, the sword turning into a streak of black and red, smashing through the Cyclops' head without any problems. It completely shredded up a large portion of his upper torso along with the familiars before burrowing deep underground. There was no explosion of energy or aftereffects, just pure brute power that destroyed everything it came into contact with, collecting the pieces of the Cyclops' corpse that would serve as proof of subjugation. Shiro unsummoned her blade with satisfaction. With the addition of Error 403, its power had tremendously soared, and she was somewhat confident in challenging the primordial trials. While she could not use Error 403 with every attack, she understood how to charge the element so that it'd activate with her next attack. Each monster that she kills gives it a minimum of 1 energy. Powerful monsters can grant up to 25. Once it reaches 100, Error 403 will wake up, and whenever it sees a powerful monster, it'll enhance Shiro's attack so that he could consume it.as for what happens after he consumes it. Shiro didn't know, but it didn't matter to her since there was still time to test that out at a later date. The most important task right now was to claim her armor and attempt the trials. During the time that she had been working at the library, Shiro had asked Quella to talk to her about the primordial trials, what they give, and their contents. Her reply to the question was, "I do not know all of the details as the trials themselves change depending on who attempts it. It is not like the lesser trials that stay the same regardless. In terms of difficulty, I can tell you which is the hardest along with some of the basic benefits they give. However, the key ability they give when you obtain them changes as well. With the 5 primordial trials being the hardest task in the world, it was only natural that each trial was tailored to the individual in terms of ranking. The hardest trail was apparently Nyx's, followed by Kronos, Uranus, Tartarus, and finally Gaia. Despite Gaia being ranked the last out of these 5, her trial was still one that many struggled to complete. Out of the 5, her best chance was probably the one with Gaia, but there was one problem. While Gaia was one of the easiest, the enemies there are heavily armored. Even with Nivlim's effect of ignoring a certain amount of armor and granting armor penetration, her overall attack was still a little too low for the enemies. It would take her forever to even kill one of them, never mind a whole bunch of them. As for Tartarus, there were potentially some rather difficult obstacles aside from combat, which was good for her, but her current tool set might not be able to accomplish that, so going it was a bigger gamble than Gaia. With these 2 out of the picture, her first primordial trial could only be between Nyx's, Kronos, and Uranus. Nyx's and Kronos were definitely a no-go right now since the monsters and powers inside those trials were the extremes of the extreme. Going there is literal suicide. There had only been 3 people to have ever completed their trials. 2 completed Kronos, while only 1 had ever managed to complete Nyx's. For the one that had completed Nyx's trial, he was essentially unkillable even by those that had Kronos power, since Uranus was her only logical choice. Shiro had to make some preparations for that. "Say, Quella," Shiro called out. "Amen. Is there anything I need to prepare for Uranus' trial?" she asked with curiosity since that's her next goal. Nothing much really. Though I suppose you might want to improve your control over flying. From what I know, Uranus' trial involves a lot of flying." Quella replied since there wasn't much one could do to prepare other than to train. After all, completing the trials were a matter of personal skill. "I see. Oh well, once I get my armor, I should be pretty set." Shiro shrugged and stretched her body. Since the trials were a solo experience, she had to rely on herself once she entered the trial space. ###returning to Vox. Shiro completed her bounty on the Cyclops as the receptionist had learned to just provide her with the information about the bounty spots. After all, Shiro hadn't failed to complete one yet. Even hard tasks like the mysterious monster and Hamina were completed by her. There were a few mercenaries that wondered when she was going to complete her other divinities. Since she had only ever displayed one, and that was Nike, some even wondered about the legitimacy of her completions, but after the mercenary hall had confirmed the killing of each monster, their cries of doubt were silenced. After killing the Cyclops, Shiro had actually opted out of getting more bounties since she needed to practice with her divinity of Nike more along with her sword skills. Her next trial was going to be a primordial trial, so she needed all the practice she could get. For Nike, her flight was directly tied with her stamina and body condition. If she was very tired, her wings would slowly fade away. Therefore, to combat this, Shiro worked on increasing her stamina along with her proficiency, with using her wings so that it didn't take as much stamina. She would occasionally fly through the city and turn through narrow corners at breakneck speed while making sure she didn't crash through a wall. By the end of the wait for her armor, she had essentially mastered the art of flying through Vox. Funnily enough, she had gained a nickname in the city since people would see her flying around every day. Crazy Flying Woman. She would hear mentions of this new nickname every so often whenever she flies through the city. But she had gotten used to it now, flying through the town. She arrived at the blacksmith's and saw Faden hammering away at a new set of armor, waiting in the queue. She watched as he glanced up. "Otsu, pass me your token and I'll go look for the armor," Faden instructed, nodding her head. Shiro reached into her bag and pulled out the token that she had kept safe. Checking the number, Faden nodded his head and excused himself for a moment. Coming back with a dummy that was equipped with her armor, Faden sat down and took a few notes. "Do you need me to teach you how to put it on? It's not fancy like the sword that Maria gave you, but it's above average." Faden asked. "No, I'll be okay. Here's the payment." Shiro smiled and handed him the pouch with 200 gold inside. Checking that the money was accurate, Faden nodded his head and gestured for her to leave. Furrowing her brows a little, Shiro shrugged her shoulders. Between Faden and Maria, Shiro much preferred Maria not only because her weapons were good, but also her passion for the craft was impressive. For Faden, it seemed like he was only doing this for money as he was better than average. Hence why he was essentially mass-producing better-than-average armors every day. But since she didn't know his situation, she didn't stick her nose in. Looking at the armor, she placed it in her pack before flying back to the library so that she could get changed. After putting on the armor, Shiro adjusted some of the pieces and nodded with satisfaction. The armor came in 2 layers, the inner and the outer. The inner layer of the armor consisted of chainmail that could be placed under the outer layer of her jacket since it would be rather uncomfortable to have chainmail constantly touching her skin. As for the outer layer of the armor, it was made up of 8 parts: 2 forearm pieces, 2 shoulder pieces, a torso piece, a waist piece, and 2 armored boots. The armor itself wasn't exactly craved with art in mind since they were rather plain and worked around efficiency rather than fancy looks. The fanciest thing that Shiro could pick out was probably the waist piece that acted as a second skirt since there was cloth attached to the armor. Donning the armor, Shiro was slightly surprised about how light the material was, making some fine observations. She recognized them to be made from sky metal that's harvested from islands that have been suspended in the sky for a long period of time. The main properties of this metal is that it is lighter and more durable than average. However, it wasn't on the level of a unique metal like the one that Maria had used. Regardless, it was still a good set of armor. While Shiro was changing into her armor, a group of 2 people had arrived at the city with a small sheet of paper in their hands. Shiro dead bounty, 25 gold. Alive bounty, 40 gold.